few things that are contributing to diabetes today, and it's the three main things that are causing diabetes. It's basically the breakfast of a nation has... So what would that be? Dr. Norman Bourlag got a Nobel Prize for his hybridized wheat. Let's say the average would be cereal, and most cereal is made out of wheat. Yeah? I know in Australia you might have heard of Weet-Bix and Wheaties. There's lots of cereals made out of wheat. So what's the problem with wheat? Didn't God make wheat? He did. The problem is that in the 1950s, Dr. Norman Bourlag and his team of researchers put wheat through intensive crossbreeding. See, they were trying to create a plant with a high yield of grain. And they did it for a apparently noble purpose, to reduce poverty in especially countries like Africa, Mexico. And so after many years of intensive crossbreeding, the plant had a high yield of grain, but the stalk would break. Because when I was a little girl, wheat grew this high. Have you noticed how high it grows today? It grows this high. So they had to go back to the drawing board, and they came up with a plant that only grows about 2 foot. It has a thick stem, so it can hold the heavy yield of grain. And some plants are producing 6 to 8 times more grain than the original plant. But because they didn't think they have to put wheat through safety studies, there were no safety studies done. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? No safety studies done. And farmers loved it because they're getting 10 times, sometimes 10, sometimes 8, sometimes 6, more grain per acre. 1976, he got the Nobel Prize, and then it went worldwide. So by the 1990s, every bread, every cereal, every cake, every pizza, every pasta, and of course all the cake section, donuts, pretzels, etc., they're all made out of the hybridized wheat. But it's only now it's starting to be revealed the danger of this hybridized wheat. You can't improve on God. The wheat that God made was perfect for humanity. But this hybridized wheat, it's starting to be revealed, the problems. A friend of mine, she's a physician. She finally retired at the age of 78. She said, I've been a physician for 40 years. She said, 40 years ago, you never heard of gluten intolerance. 20 years ago, it was just starting to murmur. If we want to talk about a pandemic, I think you'd say gluten intolerance. Gluten sensitivity. And a lot of people are intolerant and sensitive and don't even know it. The two most common symptoms of a gluten sensitivity or intolerance are brain fog and bloating. And as you'll see on Friday night and Saturday, the one part of the body that the great deceiver wants to take down is the brain. He wants to interfere with the part of our body where we communicate with God. It created a very complex protein structure. There's your gluten intolerance. But I want to look at something else that's dramatically affecting diabetes. The hybridization of the wheat changed the starch structure. So the starch structure that was created in the hybridization of the wheat is called amylopectin, amylopectin A. Let's have a look at blood glucose levels. Say that's normal. The amylopectin A will get the blood glucose levels up very high, very fast, and then there's always a corresponding drop. That's your amylopectin A. Let me give you something to compare it to. Amylopectin B is found in bananas, potatoes, and if you're familiar with the glycemic index of food, bananas and potatoes are quite high. So where do they sit? So bananas and potatoes get the blood sugar level up relatively high, relatively fast, and so you get a relatively low jump. So there's your B. Amylopectin C is found in all your beans. That's garbanzos, lentils, lima beans, cannellini beans. That gives a lovely steady rise, maintenance, and a nice steady drop. What does every single cell in our body want? God designed the body and the food that's supposed to go in the body to receive a consistent, steady delivery of fuel. But can you see that these amylopectins A's and B's, in that quick rise, and whenever you get a quick rise, you've got a corresponding dump. I think everyone knows that refined sugar certainly gets the quick rise and the quick dump. But how many of these foods are the refined sugar and the wheat together? There's always sugar in bread. That's what yeast grows on. Cereal, I challenge you, find a cereal without any sugar in it. Cakes, all of the donuts, etc., etc., etc. And the pizza, it does have sugar because the yeast needs the sugar to rise. Probably the pasta's the only one that doesn't have the refined sugar. So a lot of those foods are a combination of the refined sugar and wheat. A man wrote to me, he said, Barbara, you're wrong on the wheat. Jesus said that he was the bread of life. I said, he is the bread of life. But the bread he's referring to is not the bread we have today. The bread we have today is a lot different to the bread that was made on, in fact, you can still get wheat that has not been hybridized. They call it ancient grains. So spelt, kamut, enkenhorn, they're what's traditionally called the ancient grains. They're called ancient grains because they have not been hybridized. So let me show you where it sits on the glycemic index. So what's the glycemic index? The glycemic index of foods is how quickly the glucose in the food is released into the blood. And this can make a dramatic difference on a diabetic whose pancreas is compromised and not working well. Baseline is 55, so anything under 55 is considered low GI. Let me give you some illustrations. Cherries. Cherries sit at 26. Grapefruit. It's not a surprise that grapefruit sits at 25. So they're good fruits for the diabetics because they release glucose steadily, whereas banana, it releases quick, so that can get the blood sugar level up high. So a diabetic can actually control their blood sugar levels very well by just targeting low GI foods. It's not hard to Google glycemic index chart and have a look at that. Potatoes, it sits very high, whereas sweet potato, it's probably about 45. It's a little bit low. So what's the difference? Look at the potato and the sweet potato. You cut them. What's the difference? Under a microscope, it's revealed that in the white potato, the fibre structure is loose, quickly releasing the glucose. But under a microscope, if you look at the sweet potato, the fibre structure is tight, slowly releasing the glucose. That's really what makes the difference. Where does sugar sit on the glycemic index? Whether it's white or tan or brown, it sits at 59. That's not a surprise. White bread, so we'll just say all the white wheats, sits at 69. How so? It's because of the amylopectin A. That means a slice of white bread would get the blood sugar level up higher than even a candy. Wholemeal or whole wheat, where does that sit? Whole wheat sits at 72. Now how could this be? Isn't the whole wheat better than the white? Absolutely. It's got more fibre, it's got more B vitamins. But regarding amylopectin A, because the whole wheat is not refined, it has more amylopectin A in it, so it can get the blood sugar level up quicker than the refined. My husband said to me, Barbara, what are you saying? I've just had a call where a lady says, Barbara says white bread's better than whole wheat bread. I said, she's actually seen this. Obviously the whole wheat is much better, it's got fibre, but for the diabetic who's looking at their blood sugar levels, until that pancreas becomes a happy pancreas, one needs to be cautious on the food that it's given. So this wheat, let's have a look at that. You're looking at 1970s, it started to go worldwide. 1990s, it's established worldwide. Farmers love it. They're getting 6 to 8 times more grain per acre. That's 6 to 8 times more money per acre. They've got to pay their bills. So very difficult, very challenging for a farmer to find out about the wheat and want to make the decision to go to ancient grains. He's looking at a big monetary loss because he's not going to get as much grain per acre, you see.